Hello, and welcome back to page two, and welcome to the Friday conversation. Today, we are honored to be joined by C.S. Friedman, the acclaimed author of the Coldfire Trilogy, the Alien Shore, and the Magister Trilogy. And also, we are here with Michael R. Fletcher, author of
Hey.
Manifest Delusions, one of my favorite trilogies. And so, thank you both for being here. And
Thank you for having us.
yeah. Thanks for making time for us.
And I'm only here because I went off about how influential the Coldfire Trilogy was on me, and Beyond Redemption was really just me ripping off Coldfire Trilogy and pushing it sort of like somewhere like a little nastier, but really it was the whole idea, the whole like belief sort of manifesting in reality, that something in there like just caught in my brain, and like, however many decades later it was like still there. And
it's always very moving for me to hear that my work is like really touched people or really inspired people. I got a lot of very moving religious letters after Coldfire, which is kind of odd. And the thing is, I don't write anything to put a message in it, but I guess there's enough personal depth in the characters that it resonates with some people. But I do get kind of scared when they're relating to my darker characters. When someone comes and says, I really related to Gerald Tarrant, I'm like, cool, where's your address? I'll send it to a shrink.
It's always the more messed up and the darker and the more horrendous the character is, the more there are going to be people who are like, oh yeah, that character.
Sure, I relate to that. I would have done that under those circumstances.
Like, oh, all right then. So, like, I don't know. Like, what are you doing these days? Like, I am so out of touch. Like, I haven't read a lot of fantasy in the last couple of years because I can't read while I'm writing it. So I've been, more reading out of the genre and stuff. What's going on?
Well, I haven't been doing too much writing. I'm trying to get back into it now. It's been a kind of slow years for health and life lessons. So, I'm catching up. I do some tutoring on the side. I am also into the training of AI thing, training the LLMs to talk. So I teach AIs how to talk to people, or teach chats to how to talk to people. It's not technically an AI, I believe. And then I'm working on a couple of projects. I say this so hesitantly. I am considering a sequel to Coldfire, but not with the same characters. So the whole world changes at the end of the book. And I do not want to tell readers what happened to the characters. I want them to wonder, to say, okay, the whole universe has shifted. What would they do now? If you believe that Tarrant would survive the end of the book, what the hell would he do with the fate theoretically off limits? So there'll be other characters, other interesting situations that feed on the world as it is after that point, rather than continuing the world as it was before and trying to keep that going. It's more of exploring the new horizons than sticking to the old ones. And I'm also going to be doing, for ebook, I'm going to be doing a series of very short stories from the background to the Coldfire Trilogy. I'm working on one now from when Tarrant was basically a little kid, and he hints at his lethal relationship with his family a few times in the book, especially with his brothers. And that obviously was pivotal in terms of making him who he was. So I'm working on a little vignette from back when he's just starting to understand his power, just starting to get that. And we're seeing how it fits into a family in a world where there were very few adepts, because in his era, they were rare. I mean, it's an evolutionary response to the Fae, and it hadn't really kicked. He was in the 3rd century, so it hadn't really kicked off yet. So that's kind of interesting, and I'm enjoying that a lot. I don't know that there'll be formal stories could stand alone in a magazine with beginning, middle, end, and conflicts resolution, because I know my fans want the vignettes. They want to see the pieces. So I'm gonna structure it as a short story as much as possible. But the primary purpose is, these are times and places that I know my fans want to get a look at. And actually on Patreon, the people I have who are following me on Patreon, they've been giving me input into what scenes they would like and what periods in history they would like to explore. In addition, Coldfire is being made into a Roblox game.
Oh,
Oh,
crazy.
wow.
It's through the first stage where I have approved everything. Really, really big deal. I mean, big, serious developers putting a lot of money and effort into it. They say it'll take probably about 2 years to do all the programming and get it ready to go. So in about 2 years, there will be a Coldfire Roblox game. I really like their approach. Mostly they're making the world available with little hints of the actual story that was in the books. And they said if that takes off, they may do material that is more tied to the actual story. But right now, it's more of letting players go and explore, play with the Fae. Obviously, that's the big draw. Um, I'm excited to have it in any visual media at all because the Fae is so visual. It has wanted TV or movie or gaming or something where they can actually produce that and let people see it and let them deal with the directional power, which I have not seen handled elsewhere in fiction. But for gaming, I think would be awesome if it really matters where you physically are in relation to what power you're trying to use and who you're trying to use it on. So that all that has to be figured into the adventure. I mean, if you attack a castle with a powerful sorcerer, it matters which direction you come from and not just because of where the trees are. But there is a magical element to your physical relation, your spatial relationship to everything that you're using the Fae on. So looking forward to it a lot. I'm very happy with their planning. They seem to be very thorough. I don't personally play Roblox, so this is new to me. I'm trying to get accustomed to it now to see what they're doing.
Yeah. My daughter's been playing Roblox for a couple of years and she loves it. And she will, I have no doubt, be very much into the Coldfire stuff when it comes out. That is absolutely.
I have a student who has ADHD and focus is really nigh on impossible for him. And if he really focuses well and works hard, he's allowed 10 minutes of playing Roblox between hours. And for that, I mean, he would climb mountains and swim oceans, anything I ask him to do if he knows it's going to get him 10 minutes on Roblox, because his mother restricts his time on Roblox. So it's 10 extra minutes of Roblox that he can earn by really applying himself to the lessons. And it works phenomenally well.
When you're approached for adapting your work or presenting your work in a visual medium, how do you decide which to accept and which to decline? Is there certain things that you look for before you say yes?
Well, we've turned down a lot and we've only accepted two. One was a company that wanted to produce it for TV. In the end, they could not make the connection to a studio they wanted, but they were preparing to do the work and make the product. And the other was this Roblox thing. Question number one. Well, it's different from my other properties and Coldfire, because Coldfire is my big work. It's my most famous work. It's the one that has the most fans. It's the one people want to see. And we have always felt that if anything of mine ever became a big media hit, major movie, major TV, major game, it would be that. So the bar is much higher for Coldfire, that anybody who wants to do something with it has to be worthy of that, because that's the one shot. Once you give the rights to anybody, you can't go to somebody else who comes along who could possibly do it better. So we're assessing it. We're assessing this person or company from that point of view first. And number one is, can they do it? Are they big enough? Do they have the facilities? We have a lot of people with dreams, but they either don't have the know-how or they don't have the connections and facilities to do what they want to do. And they're kind of hoping this will be their break-in material, which is not what it's going to be. And we look at their track record, what they've done before. Obviously, if they've done the kind of thing they're proposing, that's, awesome. We might consider someone for whom they're moving into a new field if they really know the field well. The guys who are proposing the TV show, they run an agency where they handle talent for TV shows and supply that to TV shows. So they had all the connection. And excuse me, let me back up. He approached me 20 years ago to make a TV show out of Coldfire, and we turned him down because he didn't have the experience and he didn't have the facilities. And when he did, and he got this company going, and he is now in control of an entire company with all the talent he needs. If he wants to do special effects, he has special effects people. Anybody he needs, he has writers. excuse me, anybody he needs, he has them now. And he showed us the proposal, and we're like, okay, now you can do this. Now you're capable of it. So we made the whole sales package. It didn't sell at that time. There were a few things we were dealing with competition wise in the TV sphere that made it difficult at the time. So future may happen. But we let him do it. And then Roblox, about which I know nothing, which made this challenging. He wrote a very long letter and he explained exactly where it came from and exactly what his history was and exactly what the game was going to be. And my agent investigated him and checked out all his contacts and checked out all his previous projects. It was especially important we have someone qualified for that because it is a field neither my agent nor I have anything to do with. If we're dealing with TV or movie, I can criticize the script. Well, I worked in theater too for 20 years. I can criticize the script. I can give meaningful feedback. It's easy for me to put up my hand and say, no, not doing that. Can't do that to my work. But in gaming, I have no knowledge, therefore I have no power. I can only criticize if they translate something to me and ask for help, but I can't kind of step in and watch over what they're doing because 90% of it I'm not going to understand. So we really had to trust these guys. And I really do. We're very happy with them. They made an incredibly detailed plan. And the first 6 months were on approval. So they optioned. And then they made up a plan for exactly what the game would be in incredible detail. And then they presented that to me. And if at that point I had said, no, I don't like this, that would have ended the project. We were not committed to doing it. So they put in six months of work, believing they could make this happen and convinced me that I wanted it. And I was very, very impressed. So we are now heading into what they assumed would be about 2 years of development before it actually hit the gaming circuit.
That is crazy cool.
Yeah.
I think if somebody threw 20 cents at me, I'd be like, yes, make a book, a movie, a game, whatever you want.
There are things I've written where that might be the case, where it's like, okay, this hasn't got much of a market. They're going to do it. They probably won't embarrass themselves. It's decent money, sure, But like I said, we always felt this was the big one. If anything in mine was ever good, because it has 250,000 readers, which means it sold over 1 million books. And that's the biggest market I have for anything I've ever written. It's in like 9 languages and many, many countries. So we've always felt if anything went big, this would be it. And we had to save it for the big. You would probably not be surprised at how many people will write me and say, hey, I'd like to, write a script or make a TV or a movie or something. And it's just a fan with dreams who has no idea what they're getting into. And if you have somebody who writes a movie script with no agent and no plan for how to actually make that happen, it's kind of worthless. People don't just, it's not even like publishing a book where maybe you could find an editor who would like it. You are dealing with production companies that are going to be talking millions, if not tens of millions of dollars, massive staffs of designers, producers, directors, and everything. And you're slotting into that. And even to get read is a challenge. So anybody who doesn't know the industry, it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
So you should all be playing my game in Roblox and TV.
Yeah, that's cool. That's awesome. Can't wait to see that.
And the little stories, the vignettes I'm going to publish, those will be on ebook on Amazon. Mm-hmm. So if you keep an eye on my page on Amazon when they come up, hopefully I'll have one up in a couple of months.
Cool. Are you going to release them sort of one at a time, or do
I write them and then pick them up, and they'll make a collection. I'm trying to come up with a cover that I can use like different colors for each story, but keep the theme kind of like they did when they published Robert Sheckley's stories. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Kind of same picture, different colors, different title. I want to keep it all unified visually because, as I said, I try to write my books so that anyone can pick them up without knowing previous books. If I write a sequel, it's not going to be dependent on your having read the original series. That's really important. I mean, that will add to it. That'll add to the reading experience, but you don't have to. But these stories, they're really being written for fans of the series who want more information on what happened, and they know the setting. They know what these set into. So I feel that setting this series of stories apart visually so that the people who want that kind of thing can go in there, see them all, go, okay, these are this is this experience. And the people who just want one of my novels to try for the first time, that will not be marketed as that.
Cool. So I think I read Black Sun Rising back in, I'm gonna say 92.
Wow, a long time fan.
It was a long time ago. Yeah. I've still got the original paperbacks, trilogies. So you've been writing and publishing for a little bit longer than I have.
Almost 40 years.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Exactly 40 years to this year. So 85.
Well, what was your first release?
In Conquest Born.
Okay.
Released in 85.
Mm-hmm.
And then actually, excuse my burp, it's coming. And then actually, I had the ideas for the Coldfire trilogy, but there were two issues with it. Number one was I was using a lot of the themes in gaming. I ran a game, it was early Dungeons and Dragons, and there weren't a lot of books and there weren't a lot of rules. So any dungeon master was making up a lot of stuff. So a lot of the stuff that I was going to put in the book, I was playing with to see how people reacted to it. And I didn't want to write a gaming adventure. And I said, I am not going to touch this till I have the background and the world fleshed out enough that it is not dependent on gaming and it doesn't feel like gaming. I mean, there's a little bit of the structure, a bunch of people go off to do something. They all have different powers and abilities, but that's kind of a fantasy trope anyway. So I didn't want to do it yet. I didn't want to do it till I was ready for it. So I wrote the Madness season, my Vampires in Space book. Probably the lightest thing I've ever written. And then I was ready to tackle this. And the thing that made it possible was the invention of the Fae. I didn't have the Fae in my Dungeons and Dragons. It would have been very hard to run with all the directional and power level stuff. But once I had that, as soon as that clicked, I said, this is it. This is my book. This is possibly my masterwork, because I don't think I've ever created anything more compelling than the Fae or a concept better than that. And every time I see people discussing fantasy books, that's always what they focus on, the whole concept. I wanted to handle magic as a natural force. And I wanted to say, if it existed, if it was really a force of nature in some form, shape, or manner, what would that do to us? Not only how would it work, but what would that do to human society if we took actual magic, dropped it in the middle of this, but it followed scientific law, which meant that you could study it, you could possibly control it, you could possibly get warnings about how it was going to behave. I mean, it's not like there are a few magic users who can use this stuff and nobody else knows what's going on. It's like anyone can understand the basics. Not necessarily can everyone manipulate it, just as not everyone is a scientist. So what would it do to our society? And part of the inspiration for the Fae is, which I'm sure most readers have picked up, is Forbidden Planet, the classic science fiction film that inspired so much, including Star Trek Transporters, in which an ancient mechanism left behind, by an advanced civilization creates basically monsters from the id, takes the subconscious and turns them into living, dangerous beings. As I recall the film, I think that's what killed off the civilization. And I love that concept that something was being taken out of their minds and being turned into a monster. So that was the image I started with. But then I had to say, okay, the science, it's really happening. What's that going to look like? And my answer was, well, we're really complex beings and we got a lot of shit in there. And how does the Fae know what is what? I mean, that was the big question, is the Fae doesn't know how to interpret us. That animals, first of all, animals in general don't have a subconscious, but life forms on Erna don't, because they have a whole different relationship with the planet. So as I explained it to someone, an ex-boyfriend is coming over. Part of you is really happy and hope it goes well. Part of you would love to get back together with him. Part of you is still turned on by him and sex would be awesome. Part of you is still really pissed about whatever broke you up. Part of you is furious over his audacity at coming over, when you did break up. Part of you is fearful that your current boyfriend is going to find out and that will mess everything up. And every single layer of that is woven together in your response to this one event. And you will have different hopes for the event. One is, hey, let's get laid. One is, oh my God, stay away from me sexually, or my current boyfriend will kill me. And they're conflicting. They're not the same. So my vision for the Fae was that it's doing what the mechanism did in Forbidden Planet, but it doesn't know which part of the brain to respond to. I want to say it doesn't know how to distinguish, but it doesn't even understand the need to distinguish. It just knows there's some mental impression happening, and that is shaping the Fae so that it comes at you. I just recently wrote Nightborn, which is the prequel, which tells the story of the founding. The basic framework of the story is told in one of the prologues of the trilogy, so not totally a surprise, but I got to explore how they discovered in the first place that it was responding to them mentally, and it was throwing things back at them. And in one case, it was a nightmare vision from a movie he just watched. And in another case, it was folklore that she'd heard from her background culture years ago from her grandmother that she'd even consciously forgotten. Again, little bits and pieces from somewhere in the brain. The Fae doesn't know or care what it's getting. It's just trying to connect. And for it, it's connecting by making these things. Well, it's not even trying to connect. It doesn't have a consciousness, but you know what I mean. It acts like it does. Yeah. It's easy to picture as a kind of avatar Gaia who, that cares about something, but it doesn't. And I also had to explore, well, what does this mean to the ecosystem? What animals affect it? How much does it affect anything? If you have an area where all the animals are dying from a drought, is that going to affect the likelihood of rain? For which the answer is pretty much yes. I haven't necessarily worked out all the kinks, but yeah, you can't have an ecosystem that swings wildly and knocks off all species if there is something that could control the weather that is responding to all the species. Now, it's responding on a large scale and not to individuals. It's not going to save a given ferret who has really strong mental vibes. But in general, if a species is threatened with extinction, either the species will evolve or the world may change. But something is going to happen to keep that harmony going. And since I'm a dark writer, it's not always a good thing. And the first hint they have of this is actually with a botanist who was looking at tree rings and realizing there is more regularity to the tree rings than there should be. Then normally when you look at tree rings, there are some really thin ones, there are some really fat ones. If you look at them from the 30s, we had a drought in the middle of this country, all the trees out there, that's immortalized in their ring pattern. And he's looking at them and he's going, this is a more natural, even rhythm. It is suggesting there have been no climatic catastrophes that weren't allowed for. There can be fires, there can be floods, but that's all part of the rhythm. There are life forms that work with that. And that's his first hint that something's weird. And the other one is when all the pesky insects disappear because they can't relate to us. Nothing on the planet can relate to us. It can't connect. It's like it doesn't know what we are. It's like when you have cats and something shows up that has a weird smell. They're not going to show up and say hi. A dog will show up and say hi to anything. But a cat, if it smells weird, it's not coming near that thing. So it's kind of like that. The natural life forms on the planet went, whoa, there's a black hole over there where there appear to be living things, but they're not giving off the vibes of living things. And the planet isn't connected to it. Like my tendrils of thought reach out into everything in my area, except in that camp. So they weren't happy and they kind of kept their distance. And that was the other warning. So that book, that story is about humankind discovering what the Fae is, why they wound up using a magical template to control it. It isn't magic actually. So what made them actually go back to the patterns of ritual magic from the Middle Ages that we're familiar with, and what made them try to apply that, and why did it work? And that was one of the most interesting things to explore in the piece. Because otherwise you're just there and things are appearing and maybe you vaguely realize they're from your own mind, but what do? Your first response would be try technology, but the technology is all breaking down because that's what it does. So that was fun. And of course, Nightborn also has the novella Dominion in it, which is when Gerald Tarrant first encounters the Forbidden Forest. It's his rival in the forest. which is really his sovereignty over that whole part of the world. It's when he changes from, he mentions that in the beginning he was just a vampire, he drank blood. It was a pitiful half-life, I believe is the term. It didn't suit his ego. And then when he gets to the forest, he's accessing all this power. So it is actually the moment of transformation when he realizes he could become something more and not just go around drinking blood anymore. So it's pivotal if you know the series, and that is in the book Nightborn too.
Yeah.
See, I got to advertise it. I pulled it up though because we're not doing it visually.
Yeah. I'm realizing I think the Coldfire series that might be the first sort of science fiction disguised as fantasy books that I read, and I'm now having just written one my agent is currently shopping. I'm like, shit, did I steal that too? like how many books have your book sort of spawned? I know, I'm just looking at my own stuff. I'm like, oh crap, like the whole science fantasy, it reads like fantasy and it looks like fantasy, but it's not. And then
that's fun of it. That's what makes the series worthwhile.
Yeah.
And really, that's what Nightborn is about. It's about a bunch of scientifically oriented space colonists who come to set up a colony. They take out all their tech. They start, transforming the world into what they need. How do they get from there to a sorcery-focused mindset? And what's the emotional transformation when they lose the science and when they realize they're losing the science? One of the biggest challenges of that was plastic, because everything else I can go, okay, in 300 or 400 years, this will be gone. Buried or rotted, anything made of metal, they'll probably, salvage the metal. But I had to do something with the plastic. So, because that would have lasted forever. I'm pretty sure there is a plastic item somewhere in the series because Tarrant was collecting relics. And I'm pretty sure he had something that was plastic. But in general, Erna had discovered this substance that didn't belong. So it evolved something to eat it. So it devoured the plastic, which, if you think of how much plastic is in our lives and how much synthetic and polymers we depend on, pretty much took out an awful lot of the relics that were left behind from that era.
Cool. So Nightborn, you published that in like 2 years ago, right?
Oh yeah.
So how is the sort of how has the publishing industry changed for you? I mean, you've seen from the 90s, which, I mean, I guess I'm of an age where it's like the 90s was kind of like, especially the early 90s, honestly, the pinnacle of fantasy. To sort of where we're at.
Participating, you'll have to excuse her. She doesn't wait her turn. Okay, so if you hear her, just kind of go with it.
Yeah.
Go on, please.
Yeah. So, from the 90s to like Nightborn, like I said, was I think 2023. How have you seen things changing in the publishing industry? Just kind of all of it.
Well, the self-publishing thing has changed it dramatically. First of all, the publish on demand, which is not quite the same thing. I mean, a publisher could use publish on demand, and that gives them the option of publishing things that might not have a lot of copies. And I think that has a lot to do with why we're seeing a lot more novellas. They're easier to write. They're certainly easier for a beginner to write because they don't have the complexity and depth of a full-length novel. And now they can publish them. When I wrote Dominion, excuse me, novellas were not being published pretty much by anyone. Daw didn't, I think. I think they were working with one or two, but basically no one did. So I'd written this cool novella and there was nowhere for it to go. And I put it out privately. So that was out there in the ebook sphere for a while.
Mm-hmm. What year was that?
Oh, hang on 1 second and I'll look. Couldn't tell you. Okay, 1 second. Might be in here. Of course, Dominion is much older. Dominion was written. I managed to not have a date on my book. Sorry about that. Oh, here it is, 2021. So I published Dominion in 2021. And I took it off the market when we published Nightborn. And it went in, that might be when they printed it. So it might have been a year or two before, but it was recent.
Yeah.
I think I wrote it like 2012 originally. It's been around a while, but that's when I actually put it in book form. And now, of course, we have people starting with self-publishing, and unfortunately, that does not weed out the crap. Some self-published books are great; they're brilliant. Some of them have been made into multi-million-dollar movies, which doesn't necessarily mean they're good, but they made it. But nobody's weeding out the crap. And I just recently helped judge an award for new science fiction that year, for which I saw, if not read, basically every paperback book that was printed that year. Obviously, not every judge was going to read everything, but I've seen it. And first of all, you could tell the self-published stuff. I mean, they were. It's like AI writing. You can tell if you know what you're looking for. And usually it's because the author didn't have a sense of how to put together or market a book. And you can see it in the copy on the back. You can see it in how they planned the book. And some of them were awful. I mean, really, really awful. The old slush pile that the publishers used to just throw out, they're now going online and publishing their books. And you don't know what's good or bad. You get the book description. You get what's written on the back, the blurb. And other than that, until they start racking up reviews, you don't have anything. And a lot of people read those books and they may leave stars, but they're not going to leave enough detail for you to see what's actually happening. And a lot of them are very self-indulgent. I had one book that started with a good science fiction premise, not written brilliantly, but kind of interesting. And I was going to see where it went. And about the middle of the book, one of the characters pretty much is told they have to go figure out the meaning of life. I'm being a little offhand about this, but that was the basic concept. They had to go have some enlightened moment about humankind and their place in the universe to be able to achieve what their goal was in the book. And that's half the book. You're in the middle. So, and I'm like, okay, well, this book just changed. Basically, now it is the Carlos Castaneda. Now it is the I am using a book as an excuse with a very thin plot. Or what was the one that was on the bestseller list for 55 weeks that was like that? It'll come to me. And but that was just a loose framework of not very believable story, where every chapter was a new lesson that they learned about the nature of the universe. And that was what the switch to. So it went from kind of good science fiction to sort of not having science fiction. And I'm like, okay, that's kind of weird. And then I looked in the back about the author, and the author indeed had two careers. One was as a writer, and the other was as a life coach. So basically, he decided he would give half the book to one thing and half the book to the other. And if you're a professional writer, that's not going to work.
Yeah. You can't write half a book and then sort of like, I don't have a plot for the rest, so I'm going to teach you all a life lesson now.
Exactly. And I have so many fledgling writers who will, aspiring writers, that's a better word, who will ask about, can I do this and then change the direction or change the something over here? And I'm like, okay, here's what's happening. You have somebody who picked up your book. They have read the back of the book to see what the book is about. From my book, from Coldfire, they'll know it's a kind of fantasy epic adventure, very dark. Okay. That if they look really closely, they'll realize there's a science fiction element in the background, but it is in the background. They'll start reading it. They'll get in a few chapters. They'll kind of get into it, and they'll go, okay, this is the kind of book that I like to read. And then the book will completely change and become something different. I'm like, you can't sell a book to be one thing and then switch like a shell game. You can't switch it on the reader when they're halfway through, because if you had a reader who wanted subject A, they're now really pissed that subject A is gone. If you have a reader who wanted subject B, they didn't pick up the book because it didn't look like subject B to start with. So you're not making either group happy if you mix them indiscriminately. You can mix them very carefully. You can set one up with the other. You can mix the two together. The best way is to feed them in like shuffling cards. So you're getting both essences. In the case of Coldfire, the fantasy-esque part is very well established before there are hints of the science fiction. And those come in little by little by little, almost as something these people believe, and it's woven into the story, but it's not there's not going to be a switch to science fiction dumb until I think the prologue to book 2 is the founding on the planet. So it took me an entire book to get the reader to the point where they trust me enough that they know they're going to read something short and interesting and relevant, but that the series is still fantasy-esque. It's not going to change. If I'm a new writer and that happened in chapter 1, they don't have any reason to trust me. They don't have any reason to think the fantasy is going to come back. All they know is that I switched gears. And so that's a major problem. The other one was political correctness, which, oh my God, I'm sorry, personal soapbox, but so we had a lot of gay and trans characters, which are fine. I mean, it was simply the multitude of them compared to anything else that was a bit surprising. But with one of them, there was a trans character who was addressed by they, them from page 1, which seems like a very theoretical argument you have online about how that works and whether people should be using it. But now you're writing a book where the character is not being referred to as he or she. And you have a group of people in a scene. And you do not know if they means that person or they means more than one person. And I was reading scenes where it could not be sorted out. There's one scene where they're like in a pool and there's a waterfall and there's a line that they moved under the waterfall. And I'm like, is that the non-binary character that moved under the waterfall, or is that both of the people having the conversation that are moving under the waterfall? And that's when I stopped reading. It really hit home that that's not a viable type of language to use to tell a story. Now, if you're really, really good and you're determined to do it, you can find a way to get around it. But that means you have to constantly being giving clues as to what character you're talking about and whether you're using it as the singular or the plural, because you're not saying it can be either. You're saying basically using it as both. And you have to let the reader know which it is. So it's doable for a skilled writer, but the people writing these books were not skilled writers. And some of them were tripping over that language thing so much, trying to use all the right trendy pronouns and get everything right and perfect. And the problem is that the number one job of any writer is to communicate. You have a story, you want to tell it. If your reader does not understand the story, it does not matter what else you believe. It does not matter what messages you want to give them. It doesn't matter how woke your writing style is. All of that is lost if they can't follow your story. And I think too many starting out writers don't get that. That's number one. Everything in the writing process is second to that. If you can't communicate, you can't write a good book. It's really that simple. And that's where you could pick out the self-published books. You really could. Because what happens is with an editor, they read your manuscript, and if they like it, they say, okay, I like this, but do you realize you went off the rails completely in chapter 2? That's got to go. Or they'll say, all right, I like this. And I've said this to a lot of writers that I've helped. I like your idea, but you're assuming too many things in chapter 1. You got to feed them to me so I understand what each concept is. You can't refer to something that I don't know what it is without either telling me or giving me some more hints pretty soon.
Yeah, there's an art to feeding. There's an art to feeding the reader information sort of as they need it, and not info dumping it, and sort of that sort of like pacing it out. There's definitely an art to that.
And I think it's more important in fantasy than in any other genre, because not only is the world building so important, but the world building is part of what they're showing off. In other words, I wrote that book, and the jewel in the center of that book is the Fae. You don't get a lot of that to start with. You get little hints of it, hints of how it's affecting the world that the main character is walking into. But with new writers, their instinct is very often just to explain everything to start with, to give their history, to give the history of the kings. In this case, it would have been to give the history of the war versus good and evil that had gone down and what had happened. You would have gotten that explanation going into the church, rather than just hints that there had been a great war and they had lost, and that had shaped who they are now. And many of them want to write a prologue where they're going to give all the background. And I've seen so many agents and publishers who just say, we won't pick it up. Yeah. If we see that's what you did in one page, it is gone. We are not opening the book. common wisdom is don't give us a prologue at all. But the truth is, I use them. You can use them if you do them right, but they have to be a hook and a lead in and be woven into the story, not an excuse for dumping information on the reader. You know.
Yeah. And, I tossed a book recently. The first, I don't know, 20 pages was an explanation of their like the royalty system and the naming and all that. It was just like pages and pages of just info dumping. It's like, no. Either work that into the story, as it's needed, or like if you're like, oh, well, they're not going to understand the book if they don't have all this information up front. It's like, then you haven't done a good job of telling the story.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what we're talking about. Right. Telling the story in a comprehensible way is part of what your story has to be. And if you can't do that, you're not creating a viable book. It's not like you have a book and it's just missing this quality. If you're not communicating to the reader, you're not successfully creating a book they can connect to at all. It's not going to be missing a few things. It's going to be like missing the reader connection. My big pet peeve, and some publishers do it, is when the copy on the back cover tells too much and specifically has too many terms. And you will see this a lot again with self-published writers because nobody tells them not to do it, where they'll go something like, when Sandrola went to the kingdom of Lochmarine, riding on his kukwat, little did he know that, carrying his recta sword, he would meet up with the Sisters of Destiny. Oh my God, a word I understand. And, and it'll go on and on and on, as if they think that if they put enough of these alien words in there, you'll get the feeling that they built a very complex world.
Yeah.
I guess that's the intent.
It's that summarizing versus selling. Like your back of book copy, it's a pitch. It's not a summary.
Exactly. It's the first thing readers look at in a store and sometimes online. That is the big sell. They will look at it. They'll see the cover. The cover has to get their attention and the title. And then they will read the blurb. And that blurb has to convince them to look at the first page. And if it doesn't, nothing else matters. Not even all the little testimonials you have inside the book. Nothing. If they will not open the cover, they won't turn the page. And if they see that glossary of alien terms on the back of the book, they're like, I'm not going to be able to get into this. And I've actually counseled a few writers who now are published, but I was helping them through their manuscripts in the early stages. And my advice very often was like, just take some of this shit out. Just go where you're saying the prince who was, take out that piece. Or say to yourself, is this crucial? Does the reader absolutely have to know this at this moment to understand this paragraph? Yeah. And if not, consider doing it later.
Yeah. It's amazing how much you can cut.
Right. And the more you can hook them, the more they'll commit to learning all those words. I mean, they have a different attitude a chapter into the book than they had at the beginning. Even if the text they're hitting is exactly the same, they know you now. They trust you. They know they want to read the story. If something's a little dense and boring and filled with alien words, they'll go, okay, that's a dense chapter in what looks like it's otherwise a good book. But if that's the first thing they're seeing, they're going to assume the whole book is like that. So that was really eye-opening, judging all that stuff. So the very long answer to your question is self-publishing doesn't weed that stuff out. Everybody who thinks they wrote a book can publish the book. Not all of them are detectable just from looking at it on the page. Obviously, the publishing houses are trying very hard not to look like self-published publishing houses. I mean, companies like Amazon, I think it's Amazon runs Lulu. There were a few that were known to be self-publishing, and now people are looking for other names. If I buy my own ISBN, I can create a publishing name, which I did. Dominion is from Friedman Publishing. No, Tridac Publishing. That was my dad's company name. So Tridac Publishing has a whole bunch of books. But the goal is people don't want to be seen as a self-published book because they know there's that preconception. And so that's changed the field a lot. And I think some very good people are coming out of the field that publishers maybe never would have noticed. It is giving people a chance who couldn't have made the competition. Because, if Daw publishes 24 novels a year and they have 20 authors turning in books, doesn't matter how good your book is, they can only buy 4 new people. That's it. And all the new writers are competing for those very few slots in all the established publishers, because the old publishers, they have their stable of writers that are turning out books on a regular basis. But in self-publishing, you can at least get out there. You can try to publicize your work. And you can hope you're one of the ones that goes viral, where word starts getting around that it's really, really good. For which the odds are about the same as becoming a bestseller in fiction, because you can't guarantee that either. You can write a brilliant book and it can go plop like a drop of water in the ocean, or it can become some viral hit, and you're not really in control of that. All you can do is like set up the pins and try to bowl them over. But no one in the world, no publisher. My agent said to me once, he said, if we knew what made a bestseller, it would be easy. That's all we'd publish. But you don't know. You can write a brilliant book that gets no audience.
Yeah. Luck plays such a huge part.
Sorry?
Luck plays such a huge part.
And timing. Look at Anne Rice. She wrote Interview with a Vampire, which I felt was an incredibly mediocre book, published in, I think, 76, 77, somewhere in there, which was 4 years after Dark Shadows went off the air. So basically, this was the generation that was used to the concept of a whiny vampire that didn't want to be a vampire. That it was the big, revolutionary thing in her book, that we were getting insight into this vampire who really was sorry that he was a vampire. And I'm like, yeah, except for 4 years, I was watching that after school every single day, not news. It's a very gay book. I don't think there's even sex between a male vampire and a woman until like book 4, Lestat. Every character in it seems to be a male attracted to young boys, which is okay. It's a decent story. Not personally my cup of tea. I'm a very heterosexual reader, so it had its limits of appeal. I think it did make the bestseller list briefly, but it didn't make that big a splash, historically speaking. And then you get the 80s. We're into the vampire revival. We're into the dark goth thing. We're into the punk disturbance thing.
I do wonder if all the info dumping is done now because of attention spans aren't what they used to be. So I wonder if they're trying to hook the reader and trying to get as much information out as quickly as possible to keep their attention. Yeah. Is that, have you noticed anything? Have you noticed that change over the years?
Well, I'll tell 2 stories. One is I saw an interesting study of reading patterns online, and they did that by tracking people's eyes. They gave them various things to read and just tracked where their eyes went. And the pattern was like the letter F, which is that it would, on the first line, it would go horizontally across the entire line, and then there'd be a few lines where it was going horizontally but not across the whole line, and then it would skip down to the next paragraph, and then it would go like only a little bit on each line, and then it would taper out, and you could actually see the attention span, that not only were they only reading so far, but they were paying less attention as they went on. And yeah, you have to be aware of that, and I think the important part of that is you have to hook them more quickly. You can no longer assume that somebody's picking up a book because they'd like to have a leisurely traipse through your world. You have to give them reason on page 1 to read. Now, a hook was always good. It was always a major selling point. But I think it's more necessary now. People want immediate satisfaction. They want to sit down and read a short bit and have that be satisfying all by itself, which speaks a lot for episodic chapters, which I tended to do anyway, where something happens in a chapter and that thing kind of concludes in that chapter. It may have a cliffhanger, but the event you're reading about is contained within the chapter. I think more authors are doing that. The other story I was going to tell is very interesting. The length of books has changed a lot. When I was writing, there were very few long books. We had Lord of the Rings. Very, very few. David Eddings, who was one of the early ones. Stephen Donaldson. Very few. And I was told one of the big risks is that In Conquest Born was a very long book. They said they loved it. They were going to publish it as it was and not make me break it up. But I should know that the odds of my successfully launching a career with a book that big were very low. That the odds were against it because people didn't want to pick it up unless they knew the author. If they knew the author, they'd commit to it. 10 years later, every single fantasy novel is that long. And you can get into the info dump. You can have a writer who thinks that he can spend 2 chapters just explaining backstory and it'll be okay. You have a lot of padding too. And the books are all getting enormous. Like people are judging the quality of the book by how thick it is. Now we're getting into shorter, thinner books. The novellas come back. That's definitely a self-publishing thing because people can publish any length they want. And that was not true before. So I asked my editor once, I said, what happened in the late 80s? Why is it that people started writing such long books on such a regular basis that became the standard? And I thought, okay, I've asked a question which really has no solid answer, but it'll be an interesting conversation. And she just looked at me. She said, word processors. And I think she's absolutely right. It used to be that if you wrote a book, you had to type the whole thing. If you cut and pasted, I don't think young people know that we really cut and pasted. Really cut the pages up and tape them together. And sometimes you had to have a blank 8x10 and put all the pieces on it because you didn't even have an 8x10 shape left. And then to get the final draft, you had to retype the whole thing. And if you did a lot of revisions, you had to retype the whole thing. So the time and energy invested in just producing that manuscript was monumental, and very few people were willing to do it. And she said, with word processors, it became easy. And it became easy not to throw stuff out. And it became easy to go back and say, okay, I was going to dump this from chapter 1 because I didn't need it, but I could put it here because I kind of like it, But there's no limit. I can send her my manuscript now, and we can go through all the editing, and now I can get commentary online. And I can fix everything, and it will print a clean copy. And that was the change that gave us the really long books and everybody writing really long books. So it became the aesthetic standard. And now we're getting into the short attention span. That's coming from YouTube, TikTok. People want to tune into something. They want to get the gratification of something, whatever that is. And they're probably not going to keep reading for a very long time. They want to read it in little bits and pieces. And I think authors are learning to cater to that.
In the 80s and 90s, my book buying habits, I would look at the cover, and if the cover was cool, I'd be like, nice. And then I'd look at how thick the book was, and if it was thick, I'd be yep. And I'd buy it.
Serious book, right?
I'd scan the back, maybe, and be like, it sounds cool. But cool cover, nice thick book, I was like, I'm in.
And some authors it really betrayed. Like my favorite writing period is around the 50s, 60s, a little bit into the early 70s, mostly the 50s, 60s. I think some of the writers we had did their best work then. First of all, I love Robert Sheckley, who is, the master of that period. Cordwainer Smith, brilliant, one of the most creative minds ever to write in the field. But there were a lot more like Richard Matheson, Robert Silverberg, a lot more of the authors that today are big names got their start back then, and they were writing for magazines. So they were churning out a lot of stories very, very fast. And they were short, and they were clean. And I wrote long books, so it sounds a little strange with me saying this, but my favorite books are clean books. They were everything in that story has a reason to be there. There's nothing being written just to show off how well I write. And Silverberg, his early stories, they all had great ideas. They weren't all great stories, but they all had really fascinating concepts, and that's what they were there for. Isaac Asimov, who stayed in that period. He never really, moved into the next one stylistically, which is he wrote a story to communicate a concept. He wrote enough story and enough characters to communicate that concept, but he wasn't indulging beyond that. Around, I think it was the 70s, could have been the 60s, there was this kind of literary trend where authors wanted to be taken seriously. And you suddenly had the same authors who had written short things, started writing long things. And the long things, very often the length, in my estimation, did not make them better. But they were trying to get the respect that came with writing a quote unquote serious work. The problem with an interview online is I can't use air quotes. And Robert Silverberg is an example. He wrote a fantasy series, and the books are really, really, really thick. And I found them a really slow slog. I found they weren't what I wanted out of him. I wanted ideas from him, and they weren't. They were, look how well I can write. And I realize I'm saying that disdainfully for writers who did write well. That wasn't necessarily a bad thing to do, but it was a different thing to do. And I like the earlier style. I like the Asimov, and it doesn't bother me a lot that he doesn't have a lot of character development, because you put down his story and you go, wow, that concept was mind blowing. And he was the first science fiction writer I ever discovered. And that's what I wanted to be able to write. I wanted you to put my books down, close the covers, and not be able to stop thinking about the story. I want it to haunt you. I want there to be things in there where you think, wow, if it really went like that, this could happen. Or maybe I've been given some new insight into how people think, which makes me not like my neighbor who I did before. But that's what I want. I want to stimulate your imagination so that it's still buzzing when you put my book down.
Yeah. Oh, you definitely succeeded at that, because decades later, I was like, I'm going to write a fantasy book. And, the basic concept was reality being responsive to belief, and, well, I know where that came from.
Well, now I got to read your stuff so I can write you nasty letters or something. It's inspired a lot, but since I took it from Forbidden Planet, it's really hard for me to be critical of that unless it's a direct copy. I have seen some stuff which was copyright threatening level copy.
Oh, wow.
But it certainly inspired a lot. And as I said, I think the Fae is unique. I haven't seen anything that copied its particular flavor. But I didn't make up the concept of magic responding to the subconscious mind, so I can't claim it. Now, this Madness season, that was the one I had that was stolen outright, I believe. Vampire, and the question underlying the book was, if there were vampires, and they really were these incredibly long-lived creatures who drink blood, what would happen if the world was invaded by aliens? What would their place in the story be? And of course, to do that, I had to have my whole scientific explanation of vampires, which had to be totally apart from anything magical or supernatural at all.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I had to deal with was memory. If you have anybody who's lived that long, they're not going to remember everything perfectly at all. So they developed a kind of, it wasn't conscious, but they evolved a kind of storage system whereby if they had a really intense emotional experience, they would flash back to earlier scenes from their existence with the same kind of content. So, and he calls it time fugue in the book, because they really lose sense of time. They'll suddenly be there and they'll watch somebody die in front of them, and they'll be remembering when a similar death happened 600 years ago, and they'll relive that moment. So it gives them the depth and the connection, but it doesn't mean they have to be carrying around every memory all the time. A year after that was published, there was a TV movie called Forever Night. Nick Knight.
Yeah, I remember that.
Nick Knight was the first one, and then Canada did a series called Forever Night. And in Forever Night, not in the original, but in Forever Night in the series, one of the key factors was when they had a really intense emotional experience, they would flash back to some previous event. And I had fans writing me and going, they stole your book. It is very, especially with the timing, very difficult for me to believe that was not taken from my book, because it was kind of original when I wrote it. I mean, it worked very well on TV. Would have been really nice if it was my book on TV instead of that one, but So I've experienced that. I've experienced seeing things I created going off in directions and having a life of their own that sometimes I'm annoyed about, but you deal with it. You're inspiring people. You put your stuff out there and it's not going to stay in its little shell.
Have you ever had a reader or fans of your work come back and give you a different interpretation of what they took away from the book that reframed your own perception of what you wrote?
I won't say it reframed in terms of changing. I will say sometimes it deepened my understanding of what I wrote. Now, this happens most with the religious themes in Coldfire. Now, I'm Jewish, and I wanted to write something that spoke to human faith, but didn't speak to a particular religion. These people are descended from Judeo-Christian settlers, so they have those traditions, and they have the aesthetic, and they have the language, but I didn't want them to have a specific religion. I didn't want Judaism. I didn't want Christianity. I didn't want it. And when you don't have Christianity, it means you basically don't have Christ. I didn't want anything specific. I was trying to focus in like a sieve and determine what about religion inspires people, because it is an ennobling force in the book. Definitely. I mean, it can be a bad thing too, but basically it raises up the spirit. It is enlightening. I think there's one point, I think it's in book 2, when Tarrant realizes that they have either connected with or created an actual God force that he now can't talk to because it's rejecting him, because he created something that would reject him. So it's kind of twisted and dark, but especially with the patriarch's death at the end, it's perceived as an ennobling, empowering kind of vision. So I stripped it of Jesus, obviously, and all the specific Christian trappings. I stripped it of some Jewish trappings too, but nobody would notice that because we're like a minority of readers. And so kind of neutral religion, if you will. That was the goal. And I received a lot of letters from people when it came out who found it really inspired them religiously. I got letters from people who said that they were questioning their own faith, and this had helped them find it again, which is nothing I had ever thought in a million years I would write, because personally I'm an atheist. I'm telling a story, but I don't believe any of the spiritual stuff. But they were really moved. And one of the most moving letters I got, he was a Catholic. And it put him back in touch with Catholicism. Now, I don't even know how the hell I did that. Looking back on it, it's a ritual religion. Catholicism is a ritual religion, so is Judaism, where there are specific rituals, prayers, shapes of things. I went to an Episcopalian service once, and I described it as, they bring the holy thing in the back of the room. They hold it up. Everybody says something that amounts to, rah, rah, look at the cool holy thing. And then they carry it to the front and they read from the holy thing. In synagogue, it's a Torah. In that case, I figured it was a cross of the Bible or the New Testament or something, but it was exactly the same ritual. Like, let's approach from the back, let's hold it up. Everybody will say very specific prayers. They're all saying the same prayer. They all know what the words are. If they don't know them, they're in the book. And we're going to say them together while this thing gets put up on the podium. And then we're going to treat it like a sacred thing and give you wisdom from it. So I think that's it. This is a ritualized religion in the church on Erna. They've got the big cathedrals. They've got the positions of the priests and all those roles. They're not a kind of laid back pagan thing where the god is hanging around serving drinks. Mostly because many of the pagan gods were just created by people, through the Fae. And I think that appealed to him as Catholic, partly, that he could look at this and he could say, okay, here is something I've looked at all my life and not related to. And now I see that it can relate to something that is religiously real, that I can relate to. Now I'm understanding how the spirituality connects with the whole Pope Cathedral concept. I'm getting it now. I'm seeing the relationship. So some of the most moving letters I got were from very religious Catholics, Christians, who not only said it helped them find God, but specifically it helped them find their Christian God. And I obviously did not put that in there deliberately. I am surprised that in 35 years, not a single person has ever asked me what happened to Jesus. No one. And there's actually a very cool story behind it, and it will be a little short story, but you had colonists who landed, and obviously some of them were Christian, and even if they weren't very religious, which they weren't, but obviously some of them came from that background. Had we get to the point where the name isn't even being spoken, especially when you consider that the religion focused around Jesus says you have to approach God through him or your sins won't be forgiven. So whatever that last generation was that was worshiping Jesus, it was really, really, really important to them. Why did they give it up? Why did they raise a generation without giving them that information? Why did they knowingly shortchange their own offspring on the fact that the Messiah existed? I mean, that's monumental when you think about it. And I'll give you the answer. You can help sell your podcast here. The answer is that you're on a world where if you want something enough, it will happen. And And there are pagan gods walking around the world because people wanted there to be a god of wine. So, sure, all the energy of thousands of people wanting a god of wine will create a god of wine. That's how it works. Well, what happens when you have a religious figure, which more than anything, you want to come save you, because that's what happened in the first centuries? And his myth is that he appeared in human form right in front of people and interacted like a human. And that is what I call the age of false messiahs. How do you tell who is Jesus if after a church service one might show up and they're indistinguishable? You know, the story, I wanted to say myth because I'm Jewish, but the story of Jesus appearing in human form, incarnating, that worked on earth. That doesn't work on Erna, where anything can incarnate and look human. And it's not necessarily a god, and we can't tell the difference. And they realize that if we teach our children about Jesus, they're going to be experiencing fake Jesuses right and left. And that's not what Jesus wanted. You know, hopefully he would understand that the message he gave us in the form that he came in is not going to work on this planet. We'd love it if God gave us some other form that did work, but this one won't, because it misleads people. And in the timeline, which I'm making on my webpage, csfriedman.com, and on Patreon, there's a timeline project where I'm putting all the events into their proper slots. And there's one, the Battle of Leeds, which is the last battle, basically, at which Christianity was dropped. That was the destruction of the last living cathedral. And you had an entire generation who believed that Jesus was it. Well, some of them believed that Jesus was their savior, and they had to connect to him, choosing not to teach their children about him because survival demanded it. To me, that is one of the most painful and poignant parts of the entire story. And Jesus is such a big deal to Christians. I kept waiting for someone to ask, like, when did it disappear? How can you have something that looks like Christianity, but there's no Christ? And that is the answer. It was deliberately removed of necessity because the faith screwed it up so badly that Jesus' story on earth would not work on Erna. There you go. Now you know the secret.
Very cool.
Yeah, I thought so.
Yeah.
Kept waiting for it. Just kept waiting for it.
Yeah, I think a lot of readers, unless you sort of spell something out to them, there's a level of acceptance of, you know, of you just go, you're in the story, and you know, certain kind of person takes a certain kind of person to actually sort of start picking it apart and trying to look for the, you know, trying to understand the underlying logic that's going on. I think most readers, they read and it's entertaining, and that's good. That's the only level they're sort of interested in.
I'm really pleased and honored that when people read the book, they didn't start picking it apart and going, why is the religion this? Why is the religion that? But just accepted it as it was. You know, figured, okay, she's taking elements from Earth. But on Erna, because they came from Earth colonists, the question of taking elements from Earth is always why. Why did these elements from Earth last? But they're not coming out of nowhere. I'm not creating a fantasy world where something like the Pope in cathedrals just happened to exist. I'm creating a fantasy world where these people are descended from people who saw the original, and some stories got passed down. And this is what it became. I love the intellectual exercise for me of that. You know, I tried to not info dump and to just kind of give readers the good parts that came of it. But I'm going to get to explore it now with these little vignettes. One of them will be in the time of the false messiahs. There's no question. That's one of the absolute key periods in the development of the world. So one of my little short stories will be set then sometime. Don't know if I'll go directly to dealing with Jesus, but the concept will certainly be there. It's not the only religion that has some God in human form. But the colonists were essentially Judeo-Christian bunch, pretty unified and not very religious. So that's the background. The image of God is very Jewish. And if you're not Jewish, you won't catch that. But the concept that you have a God that is out there, is all powerful, might guide the world, but is not going to cure your son of the flu. It's not going to show up and do favors. There is a distance. We can connect to him emotionally and spiritually, but he does not go around doing little favors for people. You're not going to pray to him and go, I have a test on Friday. Could you please help me do well? And you wouldn't expect God to do it. But I have worked with people who did believe that. But and I'm sure there are Jews who do pray to God for specific things. But in general, our vision of God is not somebody who's doing little things. And I think World War II had a lot to do with that. You see the Holocaust and you go, well, if you're going to fix little things, where are you? So that concept, I think, came from my background, personally, the concept of a God without the incarnation, not only physically in a body, but in the personality type.
Do you have an approach to writing morally ambiguous characters? Is there a way that you balance that light and dark to middle of the road?
I think it's just me. I honestly think that's how I see. That's what I like to read. And that's what I like to write. I said, Gerald, I said the Coldfire trilogy I was using in gaming, and I've been gaming since like Dungeons and Dragons in '76. So from day one, when we only had the 3 little books, and you had to make everything up. And there were lawful evils, and there were lawful goods and chaotic evils and neutrals, and that was it. He was essentially a lawful evil model. And the question behind Gerald Tarrant, the driving question behind his character was, can you have something that is irredeemably evil that will do good because in the long run that serves an evil purpose? And legitimately do good, not pretending or playing at it, but legitimately do good acts because that is serving an evil purpose. And that, of course, is the keystone of his whole character, But I think I like the ambiguity. Also, I think that philosophically, I believe there is that darkness in all of us, and we certainly see it in things like World War II. You see whole populations, that darkness expressing. You're seeing it now in some mob scenes, right? We're seeing it come out in a lot of places. People who were kind of quiet, moral neighbors suddenly tolerate dark things because at that moment that's what's happening. There's a book called The Lucifer Effect, which I highly recommend, which studies exactly this. It was written after the Abu Ghraib scandal, and it is a study of why good people will do bad things. How you can take a really morally good person that seems to have no negative side and put them in a situation that will cause them to do what we would consider to be bad or evil. Fascinating study. Obviously, he talks about the Stanhope experiments a lot. And he gives all the details of the Stanhope experiment, including how quickly it broke down. Within a week, they were starting to have problems. For those who don't know, in the listening crowd, that was a very famous experiment where they took a group of people, made half of them prisoners and half of them prison guards, and just set them up and let them play out their roles. And within apparently a week, the guards started acting really abusive. I mean, seriously abusive, in some cases physically abusive. The prisoners started showing the kind of PTSD you get from prisoners who have been abused, and they had to stop the experiment. And it was a lesson to us that it didn't matter which person you put where. When they got in that setting, one group became abusive and one group adapted to the abuse. And you probably could have switched the people and the same thing would have happened. It was the roles they were put in. It was the context. It was the setting. And that's what the whole book is about, is studying how the circumstances surrounding us can cause us to become a whole different person. Abu Ghraib, of course, was the scandal where American troops were torturing Muslim prisoners. And I think it was Afghanistan, wasn't it? Or Iraq, one of the two. But it was one of our wars there. And there was a prison where they were holding prisoners of war. And there was some incredible cruelty, emotionally and physically, that went on. Some of them from people that you would not have expected it from before that. But once it started going on and the whole group was doing that, then it takes on a life of its own. That's his point in the book. So, The Lucifer Effect, highly suggested reading for anyone who wants to write books and understand this. And that is, of course, the story of Tarrant and Damien, where Damien is put in situations where he has to tolerate and to some degree go along with evil acts to accomplish something good, and the line gets blurred.
Mhm.
It's not clear to him anymore. In the beginning, it's okay. I believe in good. I believe in not evil. Here's a situation in the middle. I have to do one thing or the other. I'll have to choose. And then further down the road, he's not sure which it is. He's not sure which the parts are anymore. They're not clear. So that's a book about moral corruption, really, which is, by the way, what makes Breaking Bad a brilliant TV series. We are watching a good, inherently good, or at least neutral person become basically an evil person. There's no way around that. And we're watching why it happens each step along the way. I find that fascinating, the transformation. But I do believe the darkness is in every single one of us. And no matter how good we look, and no matter what our circumstances are, and no matter what we pretend to be, that potential is always there. And that's what the Fae is. The Fae is picking up on deeply buried instincts that we don't want to acknowledge, but they're there. We are creatures of the id, conscious and subconscious, and they're operating on slightly different levels and they want different things.
Yeah. When reality reacts to the sort of murky shit going on in your subconscious,
Right.
I mean, that's where it gets terrifying, which is
Exactly.
a lot of fun.
You don't want to face the stuff in your subconscious at all.
No.
And of course, the deities that they're having show up are more of an id, because that's where the energy is. So they're more the base hunger instincts of humanity, stripped of all the niceties of civilization, just kind of in their pure form. That's the answer. I write ambiguous characters because I believe human beings are ambiguous. And I think that if you see one you don't think is, that is a mask or somebody who hasn't faced themselves yet. But it is there.
For some of your fans, people looking for works that are similar, what would you recommend? Other fantasy or sci-fi books? What are books that you've read that you're a big fan of?
That's a really, really tough one. I haven't done a lot of reading recently. I remember when I was starting to write that there was an author, Terry Adams. He wrote a fantasy that I read it, and I'm like, oh my God, this is the same tone as my books. It's the same darkness. And my editor felt the same thing. So I don't even remember what that book was, but it was very impressive. I personally adore Barbara Hambly. I would read the phone book if she wrote it. I think her writing skill and her storytelling skill is astronomically beyond almost anyone else in the field. She has written a historical vampire series too, of which the first book is, I think, one of the best vampire books ever written, Those Who Hunt the Night. And one of the very few that offer an image of vampires I can believe. I can believe these creatures have lived this long doing this. That's what the human mind would become if it went through this. And they're creepy and they're really chilling. And I'm not a great fan of the Anne Rice vampires, so there are a number of moments in Those Who Hunt the Night when she is kind of saying, okay, and this is how it would be done right. Like there's one scene where she is showing and explaining that vampires appear to move super fast. And she's explaining what's actually happening to the human mind, that it appears they're moving fast, but they don't have super speed. In the Anne Rice book, they have super speed. So she's taking all the myths and all the stories and saying, okay, well, this is how a real creature could exist that would be believable. And you could believe he's living in the world right next door to people. A brilliant book. At least the first one. The others are good too, but the first one is introducing the concepts and it is brilliant. And of course, my inspiration for fantasy was Tanith Lee. More her early stuff than her late stuff. Tanith Lee, for those unfamiliar with her, as I think a lot of young readers may not be, is one of the greatest fantasy stylists that has ever existed. Her language is so beautiful, it hurts. It makes me cry. It makes me want to write like that. The imagery is just magnificent. And a lot of strange concepts and ambiguous concepts. She wrote a series of dark fairy tales in which she took all the fairy tales and did them from a very dark point of view. But the writing is so lyrical and beautiful and compelling. And that's what I wanted to do. And she wrote a book called Death's Master, which I consider one of the best fantasy books ever written. hands down, which is a really interesting anti-hero book because in Deathmaster, the main character is a demon. And he is a demon. It is an evil, immortal creature, who lives in a world of darkness and rules a realm of demons, who has no human compassion, no human sympathy, no human feeling, no human love, nothing. He plays with humanity because they're his plaything. He manipulates them. Sometimes he hurts them really badly. There is no empathy at all for humans. And yet, it is one of the most compelling characters in all of literature, and it's partly because she's a brilliant writer, but you can't stop reading about him. You can't stop caring what happens to him, and you're looking at him going, why do I care? This is a repellent creature. And I realized when I reread the book recently how much that inspired Gerald Tarrant. I really feel that character image is anchored in that demon, that you are compelled to be interested in this character and care what happens to him, even while you're repelled by what he does and what he believes in. And of course, in Knight's Master, the point is that eventually a little bit of valuing humankind gets in there, but he never actually alters and becomes something else. She doesn't sell out the concept. But that is the story of a slow transformation, which is mostly when a really even worse creature says to him, if humanity all disappeared tomorrow, what would you do? And he realizes that he's treating humanity as a plaything, and he tortures them for fun. But his identity is intimately tied up with humanity. Without them, there's a whole part of him that's missing, and he doesn't want them to die off. So that's a kind of pivotal moment of recognition. But yeah, I recommend that book to anyone who wants to write fantasy. I mean, the writing's beautiful. It follows my rule of being a very short book. Gets to the point, tells a story, and gets out. So that's for fantasy. You won't do better than that. And I devoured Tenafly. She was writing when I was learning to write, and I was waiting on tenterhooks for each book to come out. Haven't read any really impressive science fiction lately, but that's partly because I'm not reading a lot, so it may be out there. I'm just not reading a lot. I find a lot of it just gets bogged down in the writing, especially for new writers. They may have really, really, really good ideas, but I can't get through the first few chapters. I just don't care that much. You have to make me care about the concept and the characters, or I'm not going to be there. Did that answer you? I hope I can.
Yeah, no, yeah, it's tough.
I'll give you a list of authors and say, go read this stuff, but it's hard.
Yeah, it's tough. The time just flew by, but
I've done interviews this long before, so there you go. I think it was a good one. I liked what we discussed, and I thought they were kind of meaningful. And thank you very much, Michael, for coming and contributing to this.
Yeah, I was really happy to get to hang out. And hearing some of the background details and what was going on, really, I mean, it was this sort of, it sent me back in time, and I haven't read those the books, I mean, since the 90s, and yet they're still in there. And so much of I see so much of Beyond Redemption in sort of the world building you did. I handled it, I think, hopefully very differently, pushed it somewhere little. It's more based on insanity than sort of faith. But it's just amazing that all these years later, those books are still, they're still pivotal. They're still in there.
That's how I felt when I reread Knight's Master after so many years, and discovering that was the seed of Gerald Tarrant. And I had forgotten it. I had forgotten the connection, but as I read it, it had that same flavor of darkness. I had one reader tell me she loved the character because he was evil, and he just was evil, and he wasn't like a good person who was going to be saved. There isn't really a redemption arc. I mean, there's a sacrificial arc, but he's still going after what he wants, and the person has not changed an awful lot. He grows in terms of how he interacts with the world, but he never swears off what he did. I think there's a speech where he says, if I were to go to God and say, I'm sorry, atonement would require my saying, I'm sorry this ever happened. I'm sorry I did it. I'm sorry I extended my life. I'm sorry I got to see 1,200 years of humanity developing. He says, I can't do it. You can't ask for forgiveness for something if you would have done it again. And they said they loved seeing an evil character that stayed evil. Where the story was not about them being redeemed and becoming a decent person, because typically that is what happens in fantasy. The good character, the bad character gets reformed.
Yeah, like even that aspect, like the book, it's called Beyond Redemption. The whole idea was there's these characters,
right?
They don't get better. They don't come out of it going like, oh, I really learned an important lesson. It's like, no, they're still shitty humans. Like they have not learned.
That's an anti-hero. I mean, there are theories that the anti-hero is appealing partly because deep inside you want to reform them. And certainly with the sexual appeal of women to male anti-heroes, that's supposed to be part of it. And with Spock, with his lack of emotion, that the woman goes, okay, I could bring out something human in this person. I could, in the case of evil, I could bring out something good in them. It is possible. I get it. I have that essence inside me. And what the reader said was, I love the fact that ain't going to work. There isn't a redeeming quality. You can't look at that character and go, I'll fix him. Now, I have to mention this. It was very disturbing. But there were fans who wrote love letters to Gerald Tarrant and sent me copies. Love poetry. Now, psychologically, I find this very disturbing. I mean, just think about it. How do they even find imagery in the book that you would focus that kind of emotion on without having a real, this is like people who write to serial killers and fall in love with them while they're in jail. So it was beautiful poetry, but it wasn't just appreciating him. It was loving him and wanting to be with him. And like, you're talking about wanting to be with a man whose entire raison d'etre is to torture women. Maybe you don't want to meet him in a dark alley, possibly. Yeah, he's the best character I ever wrote that you don't want to meet. Seriously.
Fletcher, did your characters ever get love letters?
No, I don't think. I've had people like tell me that they really loved like some of the more despicable characters or related to them, which is always a little like, okay. But I haven't actually got love letters.
I read something, I think it was from Byron originally, or discussing the Byronic figure anti-hero, said there were 3 qualities that made a dark figure irresistible: physically attractive, meticulous manners, and irredeemable evil. And that was the model. And they said that was the Byronic hero, was dark, brooding, really attractive, but the good manners were part of it, that he really has the etiquette down pat. And that was very much what Gerald Tarrant was about. He was gorgeous, or they considered him gorgeous when he walked in a room. He had not only meticulous manners and the etiquette and everything, but a sense of honor and things we associate with classiness, plus the darkness. So that was the formula. I guess ugly anti-heroes don't get quite the same response.
Apparently not.
Yeah. Before we sign off, Michael, where can people find you and your work?
Brampton. michaelrfletcher.com, Amazon, wherever books are being book-like.
And Celia, where can people find you, or your Patreon or your website?
I have a Facebook page, but I'm not very active on it. I'm not much of a social media person. I do post a lot on Quora, but that's not kind of an open just talk to Celia forum. I do have a Patreon group. They do contribute to my work at this point. I also will, and I have a webpage, csfriedman.com, and that has a contact button if you want to write to me. And I also periodically teach a writing class, and I am preparing to get that going again. So this recording was great for me because I'm, discussing concepts and I'm going, wow, I could do that in a class. I could put that in there. But I do teach an 8-session writing class periodically. So anyone who's interested can zap over to my webpage and just send me a note. And I apologize for not being on social media more, but I kind of rather focus on research and writing, honestly.
Yeah, exactly. And you do reply to messages. I can attest to that. So.
Yes, I do. I reply email very fast. If you get me on a system where there's a messaging system, I may not see it for several years because I don't check them. But email, yeah, I'll reply to email when I see it, and I kind of live at the computer, so I see it very fast. So yeah, you want to write to me? Write to me. Awesome. Love to hear from fans. Absolutely love questions. This is great. Really have enjoyed the interview. This is one of the most insightful and interesting. By insightful, I mean you asking questions that led us to insightful conversations. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, it sounds like I'm complimenting myself.
I was amazing this time.
Yeah. I really kicked
I was so insightful.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'd love to do it again anytime. Any topic, would love to sit down and chat again, and lots of insight and knowledge, and yeah.
Well, when it comes time that I have something new, be it a book or a game or something, I'll give you a yell. Definitely.
Definitely. Anytime. Yeah, we'll make time. So definitely anytime.
And I am on Patreon for anyone who wants to throw me a little support. That'd be great.
Awesome. And you can find, of course, me and the podcast on pagetreon.com, and our blogs and forum are all there. So come by and say hello.
Yeah, definitely.
Until next time. Thanks again, and we will talk again soon.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, man.
And we're out.